Hello everyone, I'm Zahid from Talks at Innovation Valley, and today we have very amazing guest Matt Dascoli. Matt is a senior K-12 education strategist at Dell Technologies. So first of all, I really warm welcome you, Matt, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome, Matt. First of all, I would request you to give your brief introduction what you have been doing so far and how from where you were was your schooling, higher education, and how you got to the edtech space, and how was your overall entrepreneurial journey so far.
Sure. So I began my journey from a professional setting coming into as a teacher. I started off my career as a science teacher. I taught every core science between sixth grade and 12th grade. And then eventually I started moving into instructional technology coaching, and then I helped with the building level leadership roles, and eventually I found myself leading an IT department in a large school system based in Virginia, the United States, where I had where we launched one of our first large-scale one-to-ones when I was in the school system. This was about 10 years ago now, well before the pandemic. And then from there, I found myself at Dell Technologies, and at Dell, I really get to do some really interesting work where I help school systems through the process of change, and that is all dedicated from the perspective of the well-being of young people. So my focus is helping school systems better meet the needs of young people, and that could be through technology, that could be through learning spaces, that could be through assessment, curriculum design, professional development. Essentially, if it impacts young people, I have an interest in improving those systems and working with school systems to do that efficiently and effectively. And there's a variety of ways that we can do that. I work with a part of a team of others that work across the country. I focus on a particular part of the country on the west side of it.
So coming towards the topic, Matt, today our topic is how to innovate learning space through edtech. Matt, my first question is, when we talk about innovation in the learning space, what actually innovation means in the learning space, and why innovation is need of the hour?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think when we're talking about innovation, we have to start about what we're taught with the student at the center, the young person that we serve. What the needs are that schools are trying to meet of those young people is shifting. Well, the pedagogy that's aligned to the teaching and learning of our young people is shifting. The types of activities that we're asking of students are changing. The types of assessment that we're asking of students is changing. The integration of technology is becoming a larger portion of the student experience. And when you start to put all of these things together of what we're asking young people to do, well, traditional classrooms may not be the best avenue to meet those needs. So for example, at one time we had teachers that would be lecturing to students. Well, lecturing has really been decreasing over years and has become deprioritized. Teachers at one time were the holders of information, and they were the primary source of information. Well, now we have a much larger volume of information that we have access to and more easily accessible for young people. So we need to be able to connect young people with access to that technology. At one time, we had the way students were creating was less varied. The students were creating text. Maybe they were creating a PowerPoint, or maybe they're creating a poster. But now the avenues for creation is accelerating. With the advent of generative artificial intelligence, creation is going to take on a whole new look and feel. Putting all of those components together, well, now collaboration and human connection has a larger value than maybe it did 20 years ago or 30 years ago. That human connection and the creation components of how students are going to be approaching the artifacts of their learning is going to be different. So what does that look like? How do we actually design those systems? Well, we're going to defocus the teacher from a visual perspective in the classroom, or we're going to provide access to tools that maybe they didn't have prior, which is going to require a new spaces for what that's going to look like. And it becomes an onion or a parfait of layers of here, try to figure out where is the right mix, because you still, the teacher's an essential role in that facilitation of that learning, but how can they do it that kind of creates this students at the center of creation and the students at the center of exploration and kind of fostering those passions that young people have.
All right. My next question is when we talk about innovation in the learning space, what does this really mean by to bring innovation to the learning space? What actually we need to do as educators and policymakers?
I think one of the things that we really need to do is we need to listen to kids. I think in bringing young people's voice into the learning process is an important one. Often, I think policymakers and leaders will lean on adults and find, what do you think kids need, as opposed to just genuinely asking kids, what is it that you need? The way that this can manifest itself in a school setting is they could be sitting part of your leadership council. They could have a voice there. We've seen school systems that have brought students as to be participating members of the school board. You could have representation. You could have a student advisory council. Many school systems have superintendents that have that student advisory council that can inform them and asking them direct feedback. What can we do? Getting that student voice is going to be an important step in that innovative process. The second step is when you align your pedagogy to what you want to see those learning outcomes to be for young people, and you start to change the way teaching and learning looks like, hopefully professional development aligns to that. Teachers that are experiencing that will realize and see, like, oh, this doesn't work. This setup doesn't work. We need to shift, and then valuing the teacher's feedback of, boy, wouldn't it be great if, and then you can fill in that blank. So that teacher voice, that student voice becomes a really important part of that innovative process. The second is having a third is having a process to identify, are you achieving the thing that you set out for? So hypothetically, if a school system were to say, this is what our graduates are gonna be like at the end, and then they say, this is how we're going to get there, and these are the learning experiences we want to have. And then you could say, okay, does my space, does the physical space that my young person is learning in, does that align to that? Does that help achieve those goals? And having a documentation that says, yes, a rubric to compare. Yes, this is something that's getting us in that direction. I also think we have to consider where those spaces exist. Right, traditional school, we think of, oh, we have a school building. We go to that school building, and to learn, we go into a school classroom. But learning is not limited to school. Learning is something that happens all the time, everywhere. And being able to provide access to the information and resources that our young people needs to not exist within walls. It needs to be able to something that can be accessible anytime, anywhere. So the very idea of what learning looks like or what those spaces look like is going to shift as well.
All right. Matt, what are the major edtech tools and edtech strategies to bring innovation to the education space?
Well, I don't know. It depends on when this is recorded, because what those tools might be tomorrow might be very different than what they are today. Because, for example, right now we're seeing the generative AI become an increasing part of our learning experience. At the core of this is the avenues of access. How can we get people connected to the information that they need? Often that is through technology such as laptops. It could be technology such as the data centers that's hosting information that's going to be relevant to our young people. It's going to be the credentialing that connects our young people to specific resources for specific subjects. The types of applications that a math teacher might be interested might be different than that of a history teacher. And having that increased specialization for the types of technology and the types of applications that our young people are using, requires to be able to tailor it and say this student needs this information and this student needs this information, and providing an infrastructure that allows for that personalization of content to drive what will become personalized learning, and something that's going to resonate with the individual challenges of a specific user. So access to the information and applications through technology such as laptops certainly helps, is an important component of that. But there's a lot that goes behind that to make sure that all of that system functions properly. And then in terms of other ed tech tools, when we think about creation tools, well, we are now starting to blend the physical world with technology, and things such as maker spaces and that have ed tech that have creation vehicles here to demonstrate learning and to demonstrate iterative design, can be really powerful in the learning process. But I would say, kind of like to your specific question of like what are the most important ones, to me it's access to that information and the process by which you get there.
Uh, when we talk on the learning models and teaching models, it could be on campus, online, or hybrid. What do you think? Which model would be the more successful delivery model in the future, keeping in view the emerging technologies and speed of change?
Sure. I think this is where that student voice becomes important, because if we say this is the thing that's good for all kids and then fill in the blank, depending on what you say, it's not often that that's going to be true, because specific kids have specific needs. Some kids really might enjoy and resonate with a Socratic seminar type learning environment inside of a classroom with that teacher driving that conversation. Other students really might resonate to have that more project-based approach that's going to happen in the classroom. Some might really enjoy that distributed models of learning in hybrid or remote learning. To say that there's going to be one, and which one is the best one, I would feel uncomfortable making that statement. I think it's like, what is the right one for the thing that you're doing and the thing that you're trying to achieve? And all of them become important, and you should be able to have access to all of them and provide vehicles for them to be put in front of a young person.
All right. So the next question is, uh, when you observe the kids in your family, in your friends, around you, in the society, what do you think? What kind of learning model they love actually? I'm just extending the question with reference to my last question. What
Sure.
is
So
your?
like what are my kids like? What are my friends' kids like? I would say that the pandemic, and our whole country essentially went remote, was not a good experience for a lot of students and put a distaste in their mouth. However, I question whether or not the methodologies that we used in those remote settings were the most effective. So I would say in my immediate circles, the remote environment was not one that was done with fidelity, and maybe had opportunities for growth. However, hybrid and the fluidity between home and school is something that I think is desired, but hasn't necessarily been perfected to be able to see those areas. I can say something that continues to be a adversarial view is the traditional classroom that you would think of, that automatically pops in your mind, a teacher at the front lecturing to you. I don't think students liked that 20 years ago, and I don't think they like it now. A lot of students, some may do, but a lot of students don't. I think the more that we have students creating, inventing, collaborating, these are the things that my immediate circles tend to enjoy. And when they can do that web from a remote setting, or if they can do that from a hybrid setting or an in-class, it's the actual experiences, the things that we're asking them to do, those are the things that they like or they dislike. The vehicle by which that happens is not as important. So for example, if they were in a remote setting and they were, my particular kids, they love being down by the water. And if they were out taking water samples and then bringing that back in and evaluating with their friends, like that would be something that would excite them. Now that could happen in a class setting or that could happen in a remote setting. It doesn't really make a difference. But what we ask them to do is really important. I realize this might be a frustrating response because I've been in a number of times where people want me to like tone and say, what's the best way? And I have difficulty ever kind of saying, oh, that's it, that's the one.
All right. Matt, interesting answers. How do you see AI, especially generative AI, how it will impact the learning and teaching, and what educators and policymakers need to do to cope with the speed of change and make things compatible with the industry?
You just asked a massive question. I think that this is what will it do and what is the impact? I don't think that we have a really great understanding of what's going to happen. I think the creators of the tools don't necessarily know what's going to happen in terms of economic impacts and creation impacts and employment impacts. Schools don't fully appreciate how this could be changing what the products that they're creating and then how assessment functions. The thing that I'm confident is that generative AI will have a significant impact in education. What that is, I think, is not defined yet. So then what can we do? We can't just, I also am confident saying the thing that we can't do is just go, oh, it doesn't exist, I don't need to worry about it. That's not okay. We have to engage and we have to remain curious and continue to explore and continue to be critical thinkers. I think generative AI and what we've seen so far, the ability to be a skilled critical thinker is becoming increasingly more important, especially when we see some of the way some of these tools hallucinate and some of the ways that they provide information that may be untrue or has certain nuance that might be a little different, or it might be rooted in biased text that help generate then a biased response. We have to be vigilant on seeing what are those implications and then adapt to the technology as the technologies continue to grow. And these technologies are going to grow at a faster rate than school systems traditionally move. And so the way that we can maintain that connection is through that curiosity and is through that engagement and through those questioning. And then seeing where is it appropriate. I work with school systems now where we've gone through generative AI professional development. And I think there's nobody in the school system seems to like the idea of we're going to graduate students that don't have an understanding of generative AI. Nobody wants that. Saying all of my second graders are going to write all of their essays through generative AI. Not many people are saying they want that. But where is it in between? Where is it appropriate for learning? Where is it going to enhance what we're doing? Where is it going to make them more productive in their post-secondary life so that they can understand how to utilize these tools in the future, beyond school, and as we prepare them for enlistment or employment or entrepreneurship? These types of skills are going to be important, and identifying where is it appropriate for our young people to engage with them is going to be important. We can do that through the curiosity and the questioning, and then making some tough decisions and working with our communities to prepare our young people for it. I wish I had a crystal ball. I don't think anybody does right now.
All right. All right. So, Matt, when we see existing education models and when we see the industry, there is a huge gap with reference to the skills and knowledge. How educators, edtech startups, and policymakers can bridge this gap?
Yeah, I think that we tend to think of how we prepare young people, and they have they have to gain knowledge, they have to gain content that is, I would say, is an area where school systems have traditionally excelled. Here's the, you need to know these things. But if we leave it there, then we're doing a disservice to young people. We also have to be focusing on the collaboration, the creativity, and the citizenship, and the communication skills that are going to be important to helping our young people continue to grow. So we have to focus on the skills that they're going to need. And then we also have to focus on the attributes of who our young people are. Right? For example, if a student maintains that curiosity that's important in understanding generative AI, how can we foster things like curiosity in a young person and position learning experiences so that curiosity can emerge as a core component of who they become as people beyond secondary school? And if we can kind of put those three components together of the knowledge that they need to have to function in society, the skills to be able to interact with others and develop new things, and the attributes of who they are, we can graduate young people that can adapt to a world that's going to change and move very quickly.
All right. Matt, since the Chat GPT is launched, news are coming that educators, communities, and policymakers, not all, but just some of them, they are resisting to the change, they are resisting to this tool. For example, Italy banned Chat GPT in last couple of weeks ago, and then I guess they just gave again access to this tool. Just like that, I came to know from a couple of other countries that their policymakers are thinking that this ChatGPT tool or the tools like this, these tools will interrupt the learning process of the students. Do you really think that these generative AI tools or language models will really interrupt the learning process of the students, or do you see with some other perspective? And what do you think policymakers, how policymakers could behave on the change, I mean, on the AI tools
Yeah,
in the learning?
yeah, sure. So it's and we've seen this, at the country level, we've seen it at a province level, where schools will come out and say, cancel, block, don't allow. And then a few months later, there's sort of like this shift back and say, well, maybe we need to open it, maybe we need to have it. And part of that is, as part of it, I think, is rooted in a good thing. People are concerned about the well-being of our kids, and we want to make sure that safety is at the forefront of those interactions. And I can appreciate the idea of the initial resistance because it's not known what's needed. But it becomes an equity issue if we say that these don't exist and we're not going to expose our young people to these tools. If community A has access and community B doesn't, these generative tools are going to be a part of our society. They are going to be a part of business. They're going to be a part of how our communities function. And if we're not going to prepare students for it and pretend like they don't exist, then we'll be at a disadvantage upon graduation. And then so, what do we do about this? Is, well, we have to consider from an equity perspective, providing the appropriate amount of access at the right times for our young people. What can policymakers do? Well, one, they could start by just exploring and having a deep understanding of what these tools are. A lot of our policymakers and school leaders haven't really even dove into understanding what is a generative AI tool, how is it built, how can it be used. Creating this traditional setups that they might have had of committee work and exploration. We need to inform ourselves so that we can make good decisions. And then when we get to the point where we have that information, then we can really start to sculpt where is it appropriate and where is it not, and how can we provide schools the proper guidance to engage our young people so that they do have access, they can be prepared, but doing it in a way that's safe and in the best interests of the young people we serve.
All right. Uh, Matt, how could we use edtech tools and edtech platforms to make education accessible for all? For example, more than 300 million students, I mean, children are out of school worldwide. Do you think that technology can make it possible that we can make education accessible for all those out of school children? And is that possible that that education could be free or with a very minimum cost?
I do think that we have an opportunity to move things in a positive direction. When young people are not connected to a school community, it's very difficult for those kids to be able to grow up into a world where they're going to find success. That's maybe in the relationships that they develop and the professions that they may someday obtain. Can we close the gap utilizing technology? I do think that yes, we can provide access on a larger scale and continue to grow that. From a U.S. perspective, most kids in part of the public schools do have access to technology and they do have access to free and public education. However, that's not true internationally, and so I think we have a responsibility to help connect kids with with tools that can move them in a direction. I do think a teacher is a really important component of the learning process. Um, being Without having that human connection there, it's more difficult for a student to find success. Not impossible, more difficult. But if hypothetically, if that's just not an option for a student, well, what resources can we provide to them? What are some of the things that we can help provide them the access to so that we can help direct their learning in positive ways? Yeah, is that an option? I think 100%. I think we need to be doing every single thing we can to help kids gain an understanding of how this world works.
All right. Uh, Matt, people don't like the innovation, they resist the change. So, as educators and edtech leaders, how could we convince the educators, especially the teachers, on to adopt the change and innovative ways and tools? Because that when we talk on the young generation, those who are the learners, digital natives, they don't resist the change. They like it actually because they are from this era. But when we talk on the educator side, teacher side, they resist the change. How could we convince the people on it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that it's not unique to educators. I think it's part of humanity. As we build schemas and our understanding of the world, and that continues to grow, and as we grow more, have a more and more understanding, when we're presented with something new, we essentially either can incorporate that something new into what we see as the world. We can just completely reject it and kick it away from us and pretend like it doesn't exist because it doesn't fit with what we have. Um, or we have to change the way that we see the world so that this other thing can fit into it. And I think when we have folks that are resistant to that, they're doing those two things, right? They have to they're rejecting this idea, or the idea of changing what their perception is so hard. It's hard to incorporate that new thing. So, how do we then connect with that? Because young people, they haven't developed those kind of rigid understandings, and it's their minds are more plastic and more accepting, and can accept these new innovative ways of approaching things. So, how do we connect with people that might have that resistance? Well, I think some of the things that we can do is we just have to show the value and how it can be positive for them. A lot of times when we say, this is the new thing and isn't it fantastic, we don't necessarily connect it and show this is the positive impacts and demonstrating the value of this, or having the empathy for the people that have that change and saying, I know that this is hard and this might be difficult, but if you give it a chance, and allowing some of those defenses to come down to be open to the new thing, if we don't approach that with an empathetic perspective, it's hard for people to incorporate that. So if you're a driver of change and you're trying to help that, have a bit of empathy for the people on the other side. Demonstrate the value. that the new thing is that for them, and how it's going to help them or how it's going to be connected to them, because then they'll be more open to accepting it. The empathy component is also going to make it okay for them not to understand, right? As that resistance of this doesn't fit with my current base knowledge. Well, when you're coming at it, it's like, hey, this is the way that it was, the way a lot of people focus on this. Take a look at this. It might be interesting. That kind of approach creates a collaboration between people, and that collaboration is where that innovation can then flourish. And we see that in businesses, and we see that in great teachers that are doing that with students. I think that's an option for those that are trying to drive that change.
All right. Matt, keeping in view the AI, especially generative AI, when we see the tech leaders and tech companies like Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, and many more companies, what we see is uh, they are more focused on technology side rather than the human side or the humanity. So, for example, I was listening a brief of Sundar Pichai, and he was briefing, I guess, on a new AI feature of Gmail and some other generative AI tools from the Google. And what somebody actually clipped one of all his speech, and he was speaking various time two words: AI, generative AI, generative AI. So what I was observing, that technology leaders and companies are more focused on AI and robotics kind of things instead of humanity and human centric approach. So how could we make it, I mean, balanced and
Mhm.
human centric?
Yeah, I don't know. There's as you were asking your question, I was mentally debating like, do I agree with that they're not focused on the human approach? Because I think a lot of technology companies, as they're developing, very much want to connect with humans and empower them. At Dell, one of the things that we talk about here is empowering the human potential, right? Technology without the human there is usually a technology that is not necessarily used. Maybe that'll be shifting, we'll see, but that technology is usually designed for humans. So, even the things that we're describing, AI being incorporated into some of our productivity tools, the reason that we want that becomes valuable is because people need those tools. And hopefully, I think that the best implementations of technology should allow humanity to become more human, and as opposed to less human. And we see that in the classroom. The best teachers that are able to incorporate technology, when they're using it effectively, frees them up to be able to create more connection to kids, to be able to have a deeper understanding of who they are, and help resonate with what they're teaching and learning. Um, and so for like the challenge of those companies, I would say, yeah, keeping people in mind and how they're using the technology is important. I would say things that are important is I personally would love to hear more on like the implications of humanity. Like, hey, we did this one thing that was really valuable for people, but what does that impact other places that could potentially be negative or might need some sort of mitigation approach to helping with that? Um, and I think as we continue to develop these technologies, that kind of balance of unintended consequences would would be important to consider.
All right. Uh, Matt, trust me, this whole podcast and conversation was really insightful. And I'm really thankful to you for joining. In the last, is not the question, I would like to ask you, what one message and advice would you like to give all the audience of my podcast who are university students, university teachers, school students, school teachers, and education community, startup community, and business community? Uh, any inspiring message that you think could make them inspired and make some impact and change in the society?
Yeah, I guess I do I have a particular passion for curiosity, and I have a particular passion for questions. When we lead with curiosity and empathy, I think that good things can emerge. Because it's going to lead you down a path of understanding. And I think if you're a business, it'll help understand the customers that you're connecting with. If you're a teacher, being empathetic and curious to with your students will help you connect with them and help them on those students on the journey. And fostering in our students, I think, could result in a society that grows in a way that is more collaborative and more collaborative and have a positive impact on society. So if I were to leave with like my passions or my interests, I think leading with empathetic curiosity in your actions would be the parting words.
All right. Thank you so much, Matt, for joining. I
Thank
have